My name is Eleanor Brooks, and at 60 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. After 3 decades in marketing, climbing from a junior copywriter to a creative director, I retired to a small wooden house in Asheville, North Carolina, nestled against the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air here smells of pine, and every morning I wake to sunlight spilling through my windows, painting the hardwood floors gold. I'd worked hard for this peace, saved carefully, paid off my house, built a life that felt like enough. My days had a rhythm I loved, tending my garden, reading novels on the porch, teaching free creative writing classes at the community center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Still, there was a quiet ache I couldn't shake. My only child, Evan, was a stranger to me in so many ways. At 38, he was a tech entrepreneur in Seattle, chasing dreams of startup glory. He had his father's charm, those quick smiles and easy confidence that could light up a room, but he also had his father's restlessness, the kind that left me and my son alone when Evan was just 10. I'd poured everything into raising him after that. Late nights at the agency, extra freelance gigs, every penny saved for his college tuition. I wanted him to have the chances I never did, but somewhere along the way, we drifted apart. By the time Evan was in his 20s, he was caught up in his own world. Pitch meetings, sleek offices, a revolving door of ambitious girlfriends. Our calls dwindled to once every few months, usually. Just a quick check-in. "I'm good, Mom. Busy, you know," he'd say, his voice clipped, distracted. Birthday texts replaced cards. Christmas visits, when they happened, felt like obligations. I'd see his life unfold on social media. Fancy dinners, tech conferences, posts about disrupting the industry. I told myself I was proud, even if I barely knew the man he'd become. I'd made peace with the distance, or so I thought. I'd learned not to expect too much, not after his father's promises turned to dust. That man could talk his way into anything, and I'd believed him once, only to be left with a mortgage and a broken heart. So I built my walls, kept my life simple, my finances tight. I wasn't cold, just careful. I told myself I didn't need Evan to fill the quiet spaces in my days. The mountains were enough. My books were enough. My students, with their eager stories, were enough. But then, on a crisp March morning, my phone rang. Evan's name lit up the screen, and his voice, warm and deliberate, caught me off guard. "Mom, I've been thinking about us, about family," he said. "I'm coming to Asheville this weekend. There's something I want to talk about face to face." I felt a flicker of hope, the kind that sneaks past your better judgment. Maybe this was a chance to bridge the gap. Maybe he was finally reaching out. I didn't know then that his words would unravel everything I'd built, or that I'd have to fight to keep it. When Evan pulled into my driveway that Saturday, I was waiting on the porch, a mug of coffee warming my hands. He stepped out of a sleek rental car, looking every bit the tech founder in his tailored jacket and polished loafers. He carried a gift bag, and when he hugged me, his cologne was sharp, expensive. "Mom, you look great," he said, handing me a silk scarf, deep blue like the mountains at dusk. It was the kind of gift you give when you're trying to make an impression. I smiled, but something in his eyes, too eager, too practiced, made my stomach tighten. He stayed for 3 days, longer than any visit since he'd left for college. Over coffee, he asked about my garden, my writing classes, even my health. "You're still hiking those trails?" he said, grinning. "I need to keep up with you." It felt good, hearing him talk like that, like we were family again. But I couldn't shake the memory of his father's charm, the way it always came before a request. Still, I let myself hope. Maybe this was different. Maybe Evan had changed. That first night, over dinner at my kitchen table, roast chicken and a bottle of Pinot Noir he'd brought, He started talking about his work. His startup, a platform for sharing user data across apps, was struggling. The market's brutal, he said, swirling his wine. Investors are pulling back. Competitors are undercutting us. I've stretched things too far. His voice was casual, but his knuckles were white around the glass. I asked about his co-founders, the two friends he'd started the company with. They're recalibrating, he said, vague, his eyes flicking to the window. It's complicated. The second night, he got to the point. We were clearing dishes when he leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and said, "Mom, I've been thinking about your situation." I raised an eyebrow, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "My situation's fine, Evan." He shook his head like I was missing something obvious. "You've got this house paid off, solid savings, but it's not optimized. Tax-wise, you're exposed. There's a better way to secure your future and help me out at the same time." Laid out his plan, his voice smooth, practiced. He wanted to put my house and his company's assets, mostly shares and intellectual property, into a family trust. He'd manage it, generate income, protect me from what he called crippling estate taxes. It would also give his startup the collateral it needed to secure a loan, just enough to bridge the gap until the market turned. "It's a win-win," he said, leaning forward, his eyes bright. "You're safe, and I get breathing room. I felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. "What about your co-founders?" I asked. "Don't they have a say in this?" He waved a hand. "They're on board. It's just logistics now." His answer was too quick, too smooth. I thought of his father again, the way he'd gloss over details when he was hiding something. "It sounds complicated," I said, keeping my tone even. Evan reached for my hand, his grip firm. "That's why you have me, Mom. This is what." "I do. Let me take care of you for once." Those words hit hard. For once. All those years I'd worked late, skipped vacations, paid for his coding boot camps. Hadn't I taken care of him? But the idea of him stepping up, of us being a team, tugged at something deep. I wanted to believe him. "I'll think about it," I said, pulling my hand back. The next morning, he spread paperwork across the table. Trust agreements, transfer forms, power of attorney documents. The stack was thick, the language dense. "We need to move fast," he said, tapping a pen. "The investors won't wait." I stared at the pages, my old marketing instincts kicking in. I'd written enough contracts to know when something felt off. "This is a lot, Evan," I said. "I need time to review it." His smile flickered, just for a second before he nodded. "Of course. But we're on a deadline. Tuesday at the latest." After he left, I sat with the documents, the house quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. Something wasn't right. Not just the rushed timeline or his sudden warmth. It was the way he'd avoided my questions, the way his eyes slid away when I pressed for details. I'd been burned before, trusting too easily. Not this time. I picked up my phone and called Laura Mitchell, an old friend who'd switched from marketing to financial law. "Send me everything," she said, her voice sharp. "And don't sign a thing until I've looked at it." I sat at my kitchen table, the paperwork Evan left behind spread out like a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. The Blue Ridge Mountains loomed outside my window, their steady presence a contrast to the unease twisting in my chest. I'd spent my career crafting campaigns, reading between the lines of client briefs, spotting the gaps in their promises. Something about Evan's plan felt like a pitch gone wrong, too polished, too urgent. By the time Laura Mitchell called me back 2 days later, I was ready for the worst. "Eleanor, this isn't a trust to protect you," Laura said, her voice clipped over the phone. "It's a handover. If you sign these, Evan gets control of your house, your savings, everything. The trust structure puts you as a beneficiary, But he's the trustee. He could sell your assets, borrow against them, drain your accounts. I felt the air leave my lungs. That can't be right, I said, though the truth was sinking in. It's all here, she insisted. And there's more. His company shares? They're part of the deal, but they come with massive liabilities. You'd be on the hook for his debts. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. Evan, my son, had come to me with a plan to strip away everything I'd built. Why not just ask for a loan? Was he in deeper trouble than he'd let on? I thought of his tense smiles, his vague answers about his co-founders. What do? I asked Laura. First check your accounts, she said. Then get a lawyer who knows fraud. I'll send you a name. That afternoon I logged into my bank accounts, my heart pounding. Everything was still there, untouched, but the relief was fleeting. I called Daniel Hayes, a lawyer Laura recommended, who'd spent years untangling corporate scams. We met the next day in his Asheville office, a small space cluttered with legal, books and coffee mugs. I handed him the documents and he skimmed them with a frown. This is a classic asset grab, he said, pushing his glasses up. Evan's not protecting you. He's using you as collateral to save his company, or worse. Worse? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned back, his chair creaking. I've seen this before. Desperate entrepreneurs drowning in debt, leverage family assets to keep creditors at bay. Let's dig into his company. If he's this bold, there's more he's not telling you. I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. I'd raised Evan, sacrificed for him. If he thought he could outsmart me, he was about to learn otherwise. Daniel's investigation took 3 days, and what he found was worse than I'd imagined. Evan's startup was a house of cards. His co-founders had forced him out 6 months earlier, accusing him of mismanaging funds. The company was leveraged to the hilt. Loans, unpaid vendors, 2 lawsuits pending. Evan had been stalling creditors, promising new funding that never materialized. My house, my savings, were his last lifeline. He's desperate, Daniel said, and desperate people do reckless things. I sat in my living room that night, the mountains dark beyond the glass. I thought of Evan at 10, his small hand in mine as we walked to school, his laughter when I read him bedtime stories. Where had that boy gone? Had I failed him, working, too much, leaving him to fill the void his father left? Or had he chosen this path, chasing ambition without a moral compass? Either way, I couldn't let him take me down with him. I could have called him, refused the plan outright, but something stopped me. If I said no, he'd try another angle, another lie. I needed to protect myself, not just now, but for good. So I decided to play along, not to trust him, but to outmaneuver him. I met with Daniel and Laura again, this time bringing in Sarah Klein, a forensic accountant Daniel trusted. Over coffee in Daniel's office, we mapped out a strategy. We'll draft new documents, Daniel said, scribbling notes. They'll look like what Evan wants, a trust giving him control. But we'll build in protections. Your house stays out of the trust entirely. His company shares transfer to you, but without the liabilities. And every major decision, sales, loans, requires your signature. Sarah nodded, her laptop open. I've seen Evan's financials. He's betting on quick cash from your assets. If we lock him out, he'll have to face his creditors. Hesitated. What if he figures it out? Daniel smiled, a rare glint in his eyes. That's why we make it subtle. The documents will read like a standard trust, but the fine print will tie his hands. He won't see it until it's too late. I took a deep breath. And if he tries to fight me? Sarah glanced at me. Record everything, every call, every meeting. North Carolina's a one-party consent state. If he sues, those recordings will bury him. That night I tested my phone's recording app, speaking softly into it as the house creaked around me. I thought of Evan's father, his promises that always hit a catch. I'd been naive then, trusting too easily, not anymore. I called Evan the next morning, keeping my voice warm but uncertain. "I've been looking at your plan," I said. "I'm still nervous about losing control, but I want to help. Can you explain it again?" His relief was palpable, even over the phone. "Mom, you're making the right call. I'll come back this weekend. We'll go through it together." As I hung up, I felt a strange calm. Evan thought he was pulling the strings, but I was already steps ahead. I wasn't just protecting my house or my savings. I was protecting the life I'd built, the peace I'd earned. And if my son thought he could take that from me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Evan arrived that Friday evening, his rental car crunching over the gravel in my driveway. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered, but his smile was all confidence as he stepped onto my porch. "Mom, we're going to make this work," he said, setting his briefcase on the kitchen table. I poured him coffee, black, the way he liked it, and nodded, keeping my expression soft, cooperative. Inside, my heart was steady, my plan locked in place. I'd spent the week with Daniel and Sarah, crafting documents that would give Evan the illusion of victory while tying his hands. Now, it was time to play my part. We sat at the table, the documents spread between us like a chessboard. Evan's papers were there, his original trust agreement, designed to hand him my house and savings. But I'd brought my own, prepared by Daniel, carefully worded to mimic Evan's plan on the surface. "I had a lawyer look things over," I said, sliding my stack forward, "just to be safe." Evan's smile tightened, just for a moment. "You didn't need to do that, Mom. My team's got this covered." I tilted my head, my voice gentle. "Humor me, Evan. I've always been cautious. You know that." He laughed, a forced sound, and opened my documents. For the next 3 hours, we went back and forth. He pushed for his version, explaining the trust structure as if I were a novice, not a woman who'd negotiated contracts for decades. I asked questions, specific, pointed ones, enough to make him think I was engaged but not suspicious. "Why does the trustee have full control over asset sales?" I asked at one point, tapping a clause. He leaned back, casual. "It's standard, Mom. Streamlines things. You don't want to be bogged down with paperwork." I nodded like I was convinced, but my eyes never left his. The truth was in those documents, hidden in the fine print Daniel had crafted. My house was excluded from the trust entirely, listed as a personal reserve asset that couldn't be touched. Evan's company shares would transfer to me, but without the debts, which stayed with him. Any sale, loan, or major decision required my signature, rendering him powerless to act alone. He didn't see it. He was too focused on the big picture, his salvation, my assets as his lifeline. I watched him skim pages, his pen circling clauses he thought were in his favor. My phone, tucked in my pocket, recorded every word. By late afternoon, we reached an agreement, or so he thought. We'd use my documents with a few minor tweaks he insisted on, none of which changed the protections Daniel had built in. "This is good, Mom," he said, stacking the papers. "You're doing the right thing." I smiled, my hands folded in my lap. "I hope so." He looked lighter, the weight of his debts momentarily lifted. "We should celebrate," he said. "Dinner tonight." "My treat," I agreed, and we drove to a bistro downtown, the kind with exposed brick and candlelit tables. Over grilled salmon and wine, Evan relaxed, talking about his plans to turn the company around once the trust was funded. I nodded, sipping my Chardonnay, but inside I felt a hollow ache. This should have been a real moment, mother and son sharing a meal, dreaming about the future. Instead, it was a performance. Him believing he'd won. Me knowing I'd set a trap he wouldn't see until it snapped shut. I thought of the boy who'd once drawn me pictures, his crayons scattered across this same table. When had we become strangers, playing games with each other's trust? The next morning we met, at the bank, where I'd arranged for a notary. The air was crisp, the mountains sharp against a pale sky. Evan was all business, his leather portfolio tucked under his arm as we sat in a small office. Document after document was signed, notarized, witnessed. My hand was steady, my signature precise. Evans was hurried, eager. "This is it," he said as we finished, zipping his portfolio. "The trust will be filed Monday, we're set." I looked at him, his face lit with relief. "And then what?" I asked, my voice quiet. He blinked, caught off guard. "Then we're protected. Your assets, my company, safe. I'll handle the rest." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. We hugged in the parking lot, his embrace quick, distracted. As he drove away, I stood there, the wind tugging at my scarf. He thought he'd secured his future at my expense. He had no idea the documents we'd signed were my shield, not his salvation. I'd beaten him at his own game, and while part of me ached for the son I'd lost, another part felt a quiet strength. This was my life, my home, my peace, and I'd fight to keep it, even from him. 6 days after we signed the papers, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m., the screen flashing Evan's name. I was in my kitchen sipping tea, the Blue Ridge Mountains soft and hazy through the window. I let it ring twice, steadying myself before answering. "What the hell did you do?" Evan's voice was raw, like he'd been up all night shouting, or worse. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone calm. "Good morning to you too, Evan." "The trust, Mom. The documents," he snapped. "They're all wrong. The structure, the ownership, the conditions, none of it's what we agreed to." I set my mug down, the ceramic cool against my palm. "I think they're exactly what we signed at the bank," I said, my voice even. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "We agreed I'd control the trust, manage the assets. These papers give you veto power over everything. I can't sell, I can't borrow, I can't do anything without your signature." I leaned back in my chair, picturing his face, the charm replaced by panic. "That's right," I said. "The trust protects my house, my savings. Your company's shares are in there, but the debts stay with you. Your creditors can't touch what's mine." Silence stretched across the line, heavy, taut. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, pleading. "Mom, I'm in trouble, real trouble. I need cash now. You don't understand who I'm dealing with." For a moment I saw the boy he'd been, scared after a nightmare, looking to me for comfort. But that boy was gone. "Who are you dealing with, Evan?" I asked. He hesitated, then muttered, "People who don't mess around. If I don't pay, things will get ugly." I felt a flicker of fear, not for myself, but for him. Loan sharks? Shady investors? How deep had he sunk? But I pushed it down. "That's a problem you created," I said. "Not mine." "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I need your help. Just a loan, $200,000. I'll pay it back once the company turns around." I almost laughed, the number so absurd. "No," I said, firm but calm. "You made your choices." His tone shifted, hardening. "You tricked me. You switched the documents." I shook my head, though he couldn't see. "I gave you documents. You read them. We signed them, notarized them. If you missed the details, that's on you." "You're my mother," he said, low, accusing. "How could you do this?" The words stung, but I was ready. "Because you're your father's son," I said. "I saw it the moment you started talking about protecting my assets. I've heard that pitch before." He went quiet, his breathing uneven. Then a new edge crept into his voice. "This isn't over. I'll sue you. Fraud, coercion, whatever it takes." I was about to respond when I remembered something Sarah had found, something I'd held back until now. "Before you do that, Evan," I said, my voice cold, "there's something you should know. I didn't just look into your company's debts. I looked into your plans." He went still, the silence absolute. "What are you talking about?" he asked, wary. "Your app," I said. "It's not just failing. You were planning to sell its user data, millions of profiles, private information, to a third party. A shady outfit overseas, no questions asked. If I'd signed your original trust, my name would be on those shares when the deal went through. I'd be liable when the lawsuits came, when the regulators came. You weren't just after my house. You were setting me up to take the fall." The line was dead quiet, his breathing shallow. "That's not true," he said, but the lie was weak, unraveling. "Sarah traced the emails," I said. "Your meetings, your contracts. I've already sent it to the authorities. They're looking into you now." I paused, letting it sink in. "You didn't just betray me, Evan. You betrayed everyone who trusted your company." He exploded, a string of curses I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager, sneaking in past curfew. "You had no right," he shouted. "You're ruining me." I stayed calm, my voice steady. "You ruined yourself. The trust is set. Your creditors can't touch my assets, and you can't sell those shares without my approval. The data deal? That's dead. And if you sue me, those recordings of our talks, every word you said about controlling the trust, will be in court." He went quiet again, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice flat, defeated. "Nothing," I said. "You manage the company as agreed. If you turn it around, we'll talk. But you don't get to take what's mine to fix your mistakes." He hung up without another word. I set the phone down, my hands steady, and looked out at the mountains. I'd protected my home, my life. But the cost was a son who'd never forgive me, and a truth I'd never forget. 3 weeks after Evan's furious phone call, a process, Servo knocked on my door, his face apologetic as he handed me a thick envelope. I knew what it was before I opened it. Evan had made good on his threat. The lawsuit accused me of fraud, misrepresentation, and exploiting his trust as my son. He claimed I'd tricked him into signing a trust that stripped him of control, leaving him vulnerable to his creditors. The irony was almost laughable, but the weight of it, my own son dragging me to court, settled like a stone in my chest. I called Daniel Hayes that morning, and by afternoon, I was in his office. The lawsuit spread across his desk. "He's hired a big firm out of Seattle," Daniel said, his brow furrowed. "Expensive. He's liquidated everything, stocks, savings, even his condo, to pay for this." I nodded, absorbing the news. Evan was all in, betting everything on this fight, but I was ready. "Our position?" I asked. "Strong," Daniel said, tapping the file of recordings and emails we'd collected. "He can't dispute what he said on tape, and the data deal, that's his Achilles' heel." The court date came on a chilly November morning. The Blue Ridge Mountains dusted with frost. I drove to the Asheville courthouse, my hands steady on the wheel, Daniel's briefcase of evidence beside me. Inside, the courtroom was stark, all polished wood and fluorescent lights. Evan sat at the plaintiff's table, his suit sharp but his face haggard, his lawyer a sleek woman with a clipboard and a steely gaze. He didn't look at me as I took my seat, but I felt his presence, heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Judge Clara Vaughn, a woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the session to order. Evan's lawyer went first, painting me as a calculating mother who'd manipulated her son's trust, using my marketing savvy to obscure the trust's true terms. It was a good story, but it unraveled when Daniel stood. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a USB drive, "we have recordings of every conversation between Miss Brooks and her son, proving he understood the trust terms and intended to mislead her." The courtroom went still as Daniel played the key clip, Evan's voice clear and confident. "Mom, the trust says you own the shares, but it's just on paper. I'll handle everything, banks, creditors, all of it." His lawyer objected, arguing the recording's legality, but Judge Vaughn waved her off. "North Carolina allows one-party consent," she said. "These are admissible." Evan's face went pale, his hands gripping the table. His lawyer whispered urgently, but the damage was done. After a brief recess, Evan's team returned, their confidence gone. "Your Honor," his lawyer said, her voice tight, "in light of this evidence, my client wishes to withdraw the lawsuit." Judge Vaughn nodded, her expression stern. "Motion granted with prejudice. I trust we won't see this case again." She added a pointed remark about wasting court resources, and just like that, it was over. Evan stayed seated as the room emptied, his head bowed. I gathered my things slowly, waiting to see if he'd approach. He did, standing before me, his eyes dark with defeat. "You planned this from the start," he said, his voice low. "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "You did. I just protected myself." He shook his head. "You've ruined me." I snapped my purse shut. "You ruined yourself, Evan. I gave you a chance to manage the company, to make it right. That's more than you gave me." He turned away, his shoulders slumped, and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't watch him go. Outside, the air was sharp, the frost sparkling under a clear sky. Daniel clapped my shoulder. "We won, Eleanor, cleanly." I nodded, looking out at the mountains. Yes, we did. Evan would keep managing the company as agreed, but under my terms. If he failed, I'd find someone else. My house, my life, my name, they were safe. And that was enough. That evening I sat on my porch, a glass of wine in hand, watching the Blue Ridge Mountains fade into twilight. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth. My house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not empty. My phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts from Evan. I hadn't expected any. The lawsuit was over, my home and savings secure, my name cleared of his schemes. But as the stars began to prick the sky, I let myself think about what it all meant. I'd started this year hoping for a bridge to my son, a way to mend the years we'd lost. Instead, I'd found a truth I couldn't ignore. Evan had seen me, not as his mother, but as a means to an end. His plan to take my assets, to tie me to his shady data deal, wasn't just betrayal, it was a choice to sacrifice me for his survival. I'd spent decades giving him everything, my time, my money, my heart. Somewhere along the way, he'd learned to take without giving back, but this wasn't about regret. I'd fought for myself, not out of spite, but because I deserved to. The recordings, the trust, the courtroom victory, they weren't revenge. They were justice, the kind that sets you free. I'd protected my life, my peace, and in doing so, I'd found a strength I hadn't known I had. Evan might never understand that. He might see me as cold, calculating, just like his father once did. Let him. I knew who I was. As the mountains darkened, I thought about what I'd learned. Family is a bond, but it's not a blank check. Love doesn't mean letting someone hurt you. Sometimes justice is the only way to heal, not because it punishes, but because it reclaims what's yours. I'd lost the son I'd hoped for, but I'd gained something else, the certainty that I could stand up to anyone, even him. I raised my glass to the night, to the life I'd built and kept. The seasons would change, the mountains would endure, and so would I. Justice wasn't revenge. It was the moment I took back my story, my home, my name. And in that moment I found peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from knowing you're enough.